Hi, my name is Mike Dillard, and this is Self-Made Man, the podcast for men who want to leave their mark on the world and create a legacy of honor, integrity, and achievement in every aspect of their lives. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it is time to forge your destiny. So out of the 7.3 billion people that currently inhabit the planet Earth, only around 2,000 of them are billionaires, and today we have a chance to spend an hour learning from one of them. Jeff Hoffman is the founder of Priceline.com, which is now valued at more than $60 billion, and he's with us here on Self-Made Man to share some incredibly valuable words of wisdom when it comes to building an extremely successful company. Now, what you're going to hear on this interview is not incredibly sexy, but it is the truth, and the sooner you adopt his strategies into your life and your business, well, the better off you will be. Now, as you're about to hear, Jeff is an incredibly humble guy. He's an excellent speaker and extremely generous with his time when it comes to helping the next generation of entrepreneurs. He is absolutely a mentor and a leader worth emulating. So with that being said, please help me welcome this priceless interview with Priceline's founder, Jeff Hoffman. Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Mike Dillard here, and today we are joined by a very special guest who is one of really the only entrepreneurs that we've had on the show so far who have built a business up to the billion-dollar level. And I'm speaking of Mr. Jeff Hoffman. So, Jeff, welcome to Self-Made Man. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks, Mike. Very happy to be here today.
Absolutely. So I had a chance to see you speak for the very first time last year at my good friend Ryan Moran's Freedom Fastlane event. And it was absolutely fantastic to hear your story, which I think is pretty amazing, specifically when you get into the Priceline component of it, which I'm sure we'll dive into here today. But for those who are not familiar with your background and how you got your start as an entrepreneur, I would love it if we could dive into that for a little bit and bring everybody up to speed.
Absolutely. So I never actually set out to be an entrepreneur. I never even knew that word. In fact, people around me growing up, entrepreneur was a hustler in the negative way, as opposed to really a career choice that people did on purpose. People around me thought entrepreneurs were people that just couldn't get a job or keep it somewhere. And in fact, that's what I always wanted to do. But I never said I wanted to be an entrepreneur. What I like is problem solving. And, my very first experience with entrepreneurship, I got an engineering degree in college, but I couldn't afford the college. And I got kicked out, basically. They called me in and said, you haven't paid your full tuition, you can't go to class. And I sat there and said, okay, here's the problem. I need X dollars to get this diploma. Again, it was never about the money. It was about the diploma, the goal. But I needed money to get that. But I was focused on was walking that stage and getting that diploma. So my first startup was like the first week of freshman year of college. And only because I had a goal in mind, I got to get this diploma, I got to find some way to get there, I started a little software company as a freshman and funded my education. And that was my foray into entrepreneurship. But again, not because I wanted to be an entrepreneur, just because I wanted to solve a goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And what happened after that?
I had my parents, and I know so many of your listeners will relate to this. All right, I get a good job at a good company, right, and get a good salary. So even though I'd had a little successful software company in college, I went and got an engineering job because that was my degree, and it was fine. I had a good job. I had a good paycheck at a good company, but I just didn't have a good life. I hated it every day. I sat in that cubicle and just watched the clock slowly tick by, and I was like, this cannot be it for the rest of my life, and it just wasn't working for me, so I quit. One day, I quit my corporate job and decided that I want to go out in the world and do the thing I enjoyed most, which was solving problems, which is part of the engineering training anyway. But that was when I left really to go be an entrepreneur.
And what was your very first business, and how did that go your first time around?
So I'm going to say this. I got lucky because of timing. I'm sure we did a few things right, but I'll take luck as well. One of my first startups was in the travel space. And travel was a very inefficient supplier-driven industry. Meaning, think about this. Back then, you used to have to pick up the phone and either call every airline and say what flight you have, what time, and how much. Or you had to call a travel agent who would read you a screen of things you couldn't see, knowing that a travel agent is commissioned. So they want you to buy the most expensive ticket because they make more money that way. They're not incented to help you out. So that being said, my very first travel startup, we basically created online booking. We developed the first set of technology that enables a human being that's not a travel agent to look at all the information in the airline systems themselves. We also, during that first startup, I was at a in line at an airport, and the line took an hour to check in. And when you get to the end of the check-in line, all they do is print you a boarding pass. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. I stood here for an hour and you hit print. And the woman's like, well, you got to have a boarding pass to get on a plane. I said, well, that's not really my issue. My issue is I've been standing here for an hour and you just hit print. And she's like, well, you can't go through security without a boarding pass. I said, that's not the point. It's a printer. Why can't I hit print? And she said, only an airline can print a boarding pass. So that was another product was we designed and then patented and started selling in airports to airlines those check-in kiosks that you check in today. Now you can check yourself into a flight. That was one of our inventions. So those first couple of products were the right industry at the right time and products that everybody liked. So the first company was very successful.
So we have a lot to thank you for as well, for all of us who travel.
It's funny, Mike. Every once in a while, I still get someone will send me a text while they're running through an airport and grabbing their boarding pass out of a kiosk. Someone will send me a little text that said, "Hey, man, thanks."
Yeah, that's awesome.
Those are the first products in an inefficient industry that needed to be re-engineered, and the company was very successful because we were in the right place at the right time.
And when does Priceline come into this whole process?
So not for a few years later. That startup I just told you about, we sold. Well, it was acquired for 9 figures. So we had a very successful exit. And I was still in my 20s, never focused on money, but focused on problem solving. And before we move on, I do want to share something there because it's probably, when you and I were chatting earlier, you were asking me if there was a message I like sharing. This is probably one of the most important ones. And I didn't learn it until looking back, to be fair. I wasn't smart enough to know this, but I know it now, looking backwards, and I want to share it. And it's the one that I always tell entrepreneurs, which is this: don't chase money, chase excellence. And the reason that I always say that is money follows excellence. We never sat there and talked about exit strategies and how we were going to get paid and who was going to buy the company. Not how we were going to get paid, how we were going to ultimately exit the company. Because here's the thing. People spend so much time focused on exit strategy that they don't even have an entrance strategy. Sometimes I sit there, I think, what are you exiting? Your PowerPoint? You haven't built anything. There is no exit until you've created excellence in the world. So an important lesson I learned was, let's take those printers. All of our focus was on building an amazing product that actually solved a problem and consumers liked it. Right? In the end, it turned out a kiosk that you can check yourself in for a flight is a lot better than a line waiting for an agent. And we built them well. They were easy to use. The airlines loved them and the consumers loved them. Once you create excellence, you never worry about money. I was literally sitting in my office one day and a mergers and acquisitions team came in, said, your product's awesome. We want to buy your company. I never focused on exit, on money. I focused on excellence. So I just wanted to share that because, again, I see all these people already planning what car they're going to buy when Google acquires their company someday. And there's only one problem. They haven't built a company yet. And There's nothing to be acquired. So Priceline for me was the 5th startup I was involved in. We had some that worked, some that didn't. But by the time we got to that, and it was the idea of a gentleman named Jay Walker who had an intellectual property company called Walker Digital. And Jay had this idea for buyer-driven commerce, the name your own price algorithm. And so Jay called me and some other people. We assembled a team of co-founders, and Jay said, here's the idea. Let's build a company out of it. So by then, the good news was all of us had done startups before. So we knew some of the basics, even though the Priceline business model and the internet itself were new and risky. A lot of people didn't want to touch it. We at least knew if you want to build a company, what were some of the things you had to get right. So it was, like I said, not being our first startup, I think, was part of the key to the company's success.
Yeah, absolutely. And from a consumer standpoint, right, I think this is your one business that the vast majority of people who are listening to this will know and have likely used at some point. A big part of that, I believe, fill me in if I'm incorrect here, from the company's success standpoint, is the advertising campaign that you ran, specifically with a gentleman named Bill Shatner. How did all of that come about, and what kind of impact did that have on the business?
Yeah, it's funny that when you do something right, in hindsight, you look really smart. At the time, you may have had no idea. And I remember actually even being in the studio some of the times because we, those Shatner commercials early on were internally done, right? Written by written by our in-house team and basically filmed ourselves. It wasn't a big advertising company doing that. It was our team. And so under the premise that humor sticks, right? That people tend to remember humor much more than other kinds of things. But the truth is, the original commercials were William Shatner singing and singing horribly. That was the joke, right? There had been this thing saying that his Christmas album was the single worst album in music history. So that's what the Priceline team thought the joke would be. Let's have this guy singing horribly, and he's singing in a bar, and the bar patrons are yelling, "Get out of town!" And Shatner's saying, "Okay, fine, I'll get out of town, but when I do, I'll get there cheaply using Priceline.com." So that was the original commercials, were him singing songs horribly. And the idea was just that the humor would stick. It would get people talking about it enough that people would say, "I got to see one of those commercials." So that part, why Shatner? Well, that wasn't all random either. The company's image, and this is something I tell startups as well, decide what your company's personality is. What's the look and feel of your company, right? So Priceline was this, these are words that we had written down. Space age, high tech, traveling the galaxy, captains of industry. When you think of all that sort of definition of what you want your company to feel like, which is what our marketing team did, then Shatner fits that image. So I think that that's a big piece of it, is that people need to think, for your listeners, what personality do you want your company to have? Define a personality and then go find, it doesn't have to be a human being, Shatner per se, but go find a way to deliver that personality in your ad campaign. And that's what made it work. It was a consistent and memorable personality, and Shatner delivered it unbelievably well, and everybody remembered Priceline.
Would you recommend along those lines that companies consider hiring a celebrity spokesperson, or what are your feelings around that?
I don't think it's as relevant, and here's why. When we launched, there was no such thing as social media. It didn't exist at the start way back then when Priceline, it's almost 20 years now. So when Priceline started, social media was not an option. There wasn't social and viral buying. There was only more traditional advertising, right? That's why Priceline had to start on radio and television. So today, the spokesperson mattered more because back then we were still somewhat buying from authority figures. We don't do that anymore. Today, we buy from our social network. So it's certainly not a bad idea, but it's not a requirement anymore because people aren't buying as much because a celebrity told you to. You're buying more. Celebrity might create awareness, but you're buying more out of your social network and your peer groups than you are anywhere else. So I think it's less important than it used to be.
Yeah, agreed. Interesting. I think we hit on a really good theme here a few minutes ago when you brought up the pursuit of excellence. And I would love to dive into that in a little bit more detail, but I guess how would you define excellence within a company, and what does that look like? If I were building my startup and my goal was excellence, how do I apply that to hiring and building teams? How do I apply that to culture? How do I apply that to, financial management and all of that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question because I really fundamentally believe, again, and I've been involved in 8 startups over many years now. I think that when we were successful, it was entirely because we had the best team. We had a culture that attracted the best people. I would say this is kind of my summary now. You want to build the company where the best people in your industry who could work anywhere they want to work all want to work for you. If you achieve that goal, that you're attracting the best and they don't want to leave, then then that's the key to success. I remember looking around and at Priceline as well as other companies that I had and looking at our team and saying, man, if we shifted industries today, we'd probably still win because we simply have the best people. So I thought as a founder, right? And for your listeners that are founders or CEOs or management, you think it's your job to run the company. You're the boss. I thought that too. And what I learned later was you need to dedicate a huge chunk of your time not to running the company, but to finding people smarter than you in every area that you're not the best at, and then taking good care of them. So it's kind of that servant leadership model. When I started spending my time a bigger chunk of my time forcing myself to spend more of my time recruiting and building culture and making my workplace a great place, I was able to attract people that were way smarter than me in every area that I wasn't strong at, and then just get out of their way. Take care of these people, build this environment. Part of building a culture is, let me tell you what it looks like when it's sort of done. We would have people that would come in for an interview. We'd have their resume. They'd be set up to interview 7 people, over an 8-hour day. But they'd go into the breakfast room, have coffee with a few employees, and in 10 minutes, my employees were either nodding yes or nodding no. And they were either saying, he's just not one of us, or she's totally one of us. We already know that we want her. So for someone to be able to meet a potential new employee and say, she's one of us, the only way that can happen is if you define what one of us means. That's your culture. What is one of us? What is our kind of people? What kind of values do we have? What kind of shared missions and passions do we have? So defining a culture and writing it down, by the way, making it clear. You should be loud about what is your culture? What do you value? What do you stand for? What kind of people do you want to be around? And when you lead with that culture, it attracts the kind of people you want to have anyway. But it doesn't happen by accident. It happens when you as a leader spend a lot of your time building culture and hiring high. I say hire hard and manage easy. Spend a lot of time picking people, and then once you've picked them, go let them do their thing and empower them. So I think that building a culture of the kind of people you want to have around you in your company is critical to your company's success.
From a new company startup perspective, this is an epiphany I finally had over the last year. It's finally hit home. I've built 2 multiple 8-figure businesses, and I've for the most part done everything myself. But over the last couple of years, I've managed to find amazing people who I work with on an outsourced basis, but who've really allowed the company to go to the next level and let me take a step back and frankly relax and go work on other projects. And so I finally got it. The light bulb went off, and I completely now understand what you just mentioned when it comes to the amount of time it takes to identify and find those people and to create a company culture and all of that. And I've really started to shift my time slot allocation over the last 6 months to doing exactly that. And so I'm excited about this new discovery that I've made. And I'm wondering now how the best way to identify those people really is. And the way I'm approaching it is to essentially market the company, market the brand, market the product to amazing people, ideally creating little pieces of cheese that they can find and associate with or be attracted to. What would be your advice when it comes to someone like myself who's got traditionally a small business and is looking to turn it into a large one, when it comes to hiring? I guess my question is right now let's just say I've got a company with a great product and we've got a great customer base, but we've never really pursued hiring. And if I want to go out and hire world-class talent, let's say when it comes to data and analytics, when it comes to a marketing director or a CMO, my approach that I'm taking is to put together, a 2 to 3 minute video that's basically a commercial essentially for our company and who we're looking for to put out there essentially as a fishing line, right? What do you think about that approach, or should I be doing something differently?
No, so I think that's an excellent approach. You're selling as hard as they are, right? So sometimes employment, people take it so much as a one-way street. You got to convince me that I should hire you and give you this job. The really talented people actually don't need to do that, right? They have many options. You got to be selling them on joining you just as hard as they're selling you. So I think it's great that you're doing that. But I would add one other piece. As you start, and I know you already know this, but as you start to find the most talented people in an industry, you start to see some common elements that help you market to them better. And one of them is impact. They don't just want a job, right? They want to make an impact. They want to make a difference, and they want to be part of a company that's, making its own dent in history. So I think that's a big piece of it, is not just selling the company and the job, but making sure you explain to people at a much higher level what will the success of your company mean to other people. What will your personal success mean? What opportunities to grow and experience and learn? I had a project, and this was Priceline, where we did these sort of community service projects. Our company was successful. Today, as a matter of fact, I know it's insane to even think, but the last time I saw it, Priceline's market cap, the company was worth $87 billion. People talk about the billion-dollar company. This one hit $87 billion. The company was successful and profitable. And so it enabled the company, even early on, we were able to do civic projects where we were helping our community and doing projects, again, in our communities to help people less fortunate than us. That was a huge deal. To the most talented people. They didn't just want a job and a paycheck. They wanted to make a difference. They wanted a legacy. They wanted an impact, whether it was looking back at the travel industry, whatever industry you're in one day, and saying we literally helped change an industry, or whether it's looking back at your community and saying our success helped the lives of a lot of people around our business and our community. Those things matter, and they're bigger than just we need a new director of marketing and here are the job requirements. So I think what you're doing is dead on. Market your brand, market your company, because you have to work as hard to convince those people as they have to work to convince you. But take it to a higher level and talk about sort of, again, the mission and the impact that working for this company could have as well.
When it comes to compensation, mission has a huge a piece of that, right? That consideration. A lot of folks are willing to work for a lot less money if they're really fulfilled by the mission. And a great example that comes to mind immediately is Charity Water and Scott Harrison. I don't know if you know
Sure.
Scott at all. But
I do, yep.
yeah, so he's got people, working for him at Charity Water for a fraction of what they would used to make at Apple or Google, right? Strictly because of the mission of the business. So, from a compensation standpoint for a small company or startup, is it go pay whatever you need to pay to get the best people, or try to find greener folks who are less experienced, but who are, at half the pay rate?
Well, I will tell you, again, this is just one person's opinion, but we always took this route. We always said it's better to take the same amount of money and have 6 all-stars, I'm making up numbers, than it is to have 12, 15 average people for the same money. So we tended to find as many all-stars as we could and pay them well, instead of saving the money and getting less or even more average people for less money. So it turns out, here's the other thing. When you pay that way, some people might say when you're paying well to get good people, some people might say, well, it's an expensive proposition, you're risking a lot of money, but really you're not, and here's why. Because you're not going to pay those people for 2 years if they're not contributing. So when I brought somebody on at a strong competitive salary and people said, you probably could have got him for less, what I'd say is, look, he's either going to perform like an all-star, and I'm going to be so glad I spent that extra money because he's going to be worth 10 times that, or he's not going to be here anyway. So in startups, it doesn't take long to find out. People are either contributing at a high level or it's time to make changes. And so you're not really risking money because you're not going to pay that salary for 2 years if this person isn't performing. And if they are performing at the level you thought, then you're happy that you paid a little more to get that person from somewhere else. The other part, so again, I'm going to say it's better to spend a little more on all-stars and have less people that are higher paid than more people that are average. But the other piece is realizing that it's not, of course, just the paycheck that they work for, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Really passionate, driven people. The paycheck is one piece of it, but, the equity is a piece of it. The impact is a piece of it. The mission is a piece of it. So realizing that you have more cards on the table to play than just the amount of the physical paycheck is important as well.
That's actually a great point that you just brought up, which is another question that I have. How did you treat equity-based compensation when it came to your team members? Or did y'all do a profit share of some kind? I know I've had a chance to spend some time with Gary Keller here, with Keller Williams, and they do 7 to 10% of corporate profits divided between all employees, right? So what are your thoughts on equity-based and performance-based compensation?
So I would say we have always done some of each. The equity is important because you want people to have a real stake in the total outcome of the company and the future of it. So I think that the equity piece is important. And we always, and by the way, I'm going to say this too, we were always generous with equity, not stingy with equity. I see some companies the same way they do with salary, trying to pay everybody the absolute minimum they can get away with. And that's just not the key to success, because then, you can wind up owning 100% of a really small pie, or you can own a much smaller percent of a gigantic pie. And it's gigantic because you had so many people that were talented that had a vested interest in making it bigger. So we tended to be generous with equity because it's better to have some really talented, passionate people just as excited about the company as you are, as opposed to having people say, well, Jeff has all the equity. My equity is a tiny little bit that doesn't matter anyway. And then they're not vested the way you are. It's better, again, to have a smaller slice of a gigantic pie in that sense. But in many cases, I don't know if I would have called it profit sharing, which it is, but I'm saying I don't care what term you use, but we did cash bonuses based on the company's performance, right? If the company was making profits and hitting goals, we made sure to share some money with everybody. So I believe in both. But again, the underlying theme here is don't be stingy and don't be greedy and wind up owning 100% of something really small. Share with the people that are making you successful, incent them in equity and cash and revenue sharing and profit sharing so that they feel like they are just as vested in this company's success as you are, and they will get you there.
Great advice. When it comes to, let's just say profit sharing, right? When it comes to that, how is the actual formula, I guess, written out to decide who gets how much? Is it based on tenure? Is it based on their current salary and it's a portion of that? But how do you do that fairly, if that makes sense?
Sure. And I think that you're going to find a lot of different opinions of this. So I'll just tell you the one we always used that worked for us, which is we were always entirely merit-based. There's a degree of it that's tenure, if only because you might have a 3-year vesting schedule or a 4-year vesting schedule. So obviously somebody that's been there longer has vested more of it. But that's only the vesting. What matters is how much stock did they get in their grant. And we always did that really based on merit. It becomes, when you just reward tenure, it sends out a bad message. You don't have to do anything, just stay here. Right. And you'll get your stock. That is not the message. We always did it based on merit, on the real contribution that individual made to their part of the company. And if people would come, because, sometimes even though they're not supposed to, employees share with each other who's getting what. So sometimes they know and they come to you and complain. And then that still gives you a visual. I can say, look, this is what this person has accomplished and contributed to this company. Why don't you need to do something like that? You need to make your contribution to the company. And people will then say, well, to get a better deal like that. And I'm glad when they ask me that question, because I can always look at the area of the company they work in and I say, you know what we really need here? If you want some extra credit, go do this following list of things. So we always made sure that it was merit-based. And we were always ready when somebody asked, how do I get into that? We were always happy to answer that question.
That's great advice. When it comes to excellence, what does that look like from a CEO standpoint?
Well, it really depends. It really needs to be very, very customer-oriented. So my definition of excellence never, in fact, I'm really glad you asked that, because a lot of times you see people trying to please management. Man, Jeff's the boss. We got to go make him happy. No, I only react to one thing. When customers call me and they are thrilled and delighted, I am happy. If I heard people say, I work for Jeff, I would always say, no. You work for the customer and so do I, because if they're not happy, I can't pay you anyway. So my definition of excellence was always a customer-based metric. Do customers love us? Do they love our product? Do they love our service? Are they getting good value? If customers are scoring us high on all those things, then we are achieving excellence. In fact, Mike, that brings up another point that I frequently see people when they compare themselves. They compare themselves to their competitors. They look at the competitors and they say, well, based on that, we must be doing pretty well. And it's a very dangerous game. And again, what I always have to tell them is track your competitors, but react to your customers. No matter how you're doing compared to your competitors, that means nothing, because when you say that assumes that your competitors are doing everything right. And I've had times when I went to the customer, I said, wow, there's all these great companies in my space. And they say, yeah, and we just have to pick the best of, the rest of them, the lesser of all the evils. I say, what? They say, none of the companies in your space really do what we want them to do. And so you sit down with the customer and say, well, what do you wish you had in this industry? And the customer's definition of excellence is the only one that matters. I've had little companies that beat out in those early travel days, the startup I was talking about earlier, I was going against companies like American Express, multi-billion-dollar companies with thousands of employees and huge budgets, and I was beating them because I wasn't looking to see how American Express was handling travel. What I was doing instead was going to customers and saying, what do you wish you had that no one, including American Express, has given you? And I was taking the customer's definition of excellence, ignoring the competitors, and building that. And what happened was my little company started winning customers away from this giant American Express to the point where they called one day, and that company was acquired by American Express. They called one day and said, why do our customers love you more than they love us when we're the 800-pound gorilla and you're a little startup? And I had an answer for that. Apparently, we're doing the things they want and you're not. So again, that excellence definition should come from one and only one place, not me. Not internally. It should only come from spending time with customers and having them make sure they tell us what they want.
Was there any piece of process or technology that you implemented that allowed you to gain that kind of insight into your customer satisfaction level? Meaning, do y'all use like the Net Promoter Score, or was it adding a rating system in all customer emails? But what really changed that part of the business for you?
I would say it was all of the above, because in different businesses at different times, we used different tools. So I think for your I think the important point, to the comment you just made, was getting educated on all the ways you can, constantly surveying the market and saying, what tools are available to me? How can I help myself? What enables me to talk to those customers, to track it? And a really important part of metrics is that you can't analyze stuff you were never tracking in the first place. And I noticed that with a lot of companies, that later they look back and I say, wonder how we're doing here. And you're like, well, you have not collected that information the whole year. The reason you don't have that data is because you never collected it. So thinking about what kind of tools and what kind of metrics you're going to have and how to collect that information way in advance, I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. I don't see that happening very often in our industry specifically, the internet marketing realm,
right,
over the last few years at all. Switching gears to a little bit of the personal side, what advice can you share with folks when it comes to handling the money that their business makes? And I bring that up because entrepreneurs are natural risk takers. And I know when I started to educate myself when it came to investing and that part of my life, I would apply the same tendency for taking risk into my investment strategies, which didn't work out well the majority of the time. So that was a really important lesson for me to learn. But what advice can you share when it comes to that?
I'm laughing because I am you. My DNA is risk taking. So I at times wound up taking some risks for sure that later I looked back and said I should have throttled back a little bit there. Here's what I think is the most important thing, and certainly I have zero qualification to give investment advice per se, but I would say this. The important thing is really defining your goals at the beginning. Why are you doing this? Why are you working so hard? Why are you starting this company? Right? You could work way less. You could go get a regular job or whatever, 9 to 5, or you could keep your company at the current size. If you're doing the work that startups do and the effort it takes to grow, the question is why and what do you want? I have seen some examples, Mike, of some people that never knew when enough was enough. Every time they achieved some milestone, they said, in fact, I got to tell you a quick funny story because it was my first investor in my first company. Which is the one that, we were able to sell for 9 figures to a Fortune 500 company. He bought a yacht and he took me out on his boat one day. And even though he was a good business mentor, he was a bad personal mentor to your very question here. We're on the boat and we're standing on the deck and I just can't wait to get off this boat. I'm disgusted because what he's doing is sailing along, looking down on all the other boats and pointing out how much bigger his boat is than everyone else's. And as this was in Miami, as we were pulling back in, to the harbor, the slips in Miami, all of a sudden, I guess a cloud went in front of the sun because it suddenly got dark. And I turned around to look at the sun, and it happened. It wasn't a cloud. It was a way bigger boat. And it was so big, it blotted us into shadow. And I turned around, and he looked up, and he saw this boat bigger than his, casting a shadow on his, and he said, I need that now. And I was like, wow, when do you ever quit? And in fact, it wound up costing him his wife and kids. No one
Wow.
ever, and his friends, no one wanted to be, all he cared about was another boat, a bigger boat, and more money. And I kept thinking, when is enough? So it was a good lesson for me. When is enough enough? What did you set out to do? What makes you happy? What is your goal? And what is your comfort level? Talk to yourself for your listeners now. Think about all that stuff now and know it. So when you get to it, sometimes people say to me, I don't know when to sell a company. When's the right time to sell a company? You know when's the right time to sell a company? When it hits the goal. If your goal was to have one company last the rest of your life and make $1 zillion, then you should just keep holding on to it and hoping that happens. But if your goal was whatever, to get out of debt, have enough money in the bank that you don't have to work, it doesn't matter what it is. Define your goal, write it down and say, this is what I'm trying to get to, so that you know when you get there. And so that should drive the answer to your question of your investment strategy. If you have way more ways to go, then you probably have a more riskier strategy. I was fortunate to make money when I was young. So I was able to say, you know what? I'm not trying to really make a lot more money than this. So I can take a long-term, more conservative approach to managing money because I don't need to double it overnight. But that's because I knew what my comfort level was and I knew what I was trying to get to.
Yep, absolutely agreed. Great advice. When it comes to the world these days, what are you super excited about? Is it what you're seeing in technology, happening in Silicon Valley? But what do you read about? What are you passionate about? What gets you excited?
Sure. I would say two things. One of them is definitely, so this is interesting because 4,000 years ago when I was in college, I'm old now, I literally went to the college I went to study artificial intelligence. Because I believed even back then, more than 20 years ago, that this was a technology that was a game changer, that had a chance to just redefine jobs. Right? I didn't believe one day we were going to lose all our jobs to immigrants. I believed we were going to lose our jobs to robots and AI. Even then, but I also believe that technologies, for example, if you look at Watson in medicine, technologies that could have a huge positive impact. In the time it takes a physical doctor to look at a patient, review a couple case files, Watson has reviewed like every human being on the planet who's ever had this symptom in milliseconds, and is making smarter decisions, increasing your chance of living. So artificial intelligence and this next wave of just intelligent software and robotics excites me because I think it can change the human race dramatically. But there's one other thing that excites me, which is global entrepreneurship. I've been kind of on a world tour lately. Like I just came back from a trip to Southeast Asia, working with entrepreneurs in Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Myanmar, Laos. And before that, I was in South Africa working with entrepreneurs. The tool set of entrepreneurship as a vehicle for change, entrepreneurs making the world around them a better place, is gaining steam like a snowball rolling downhill. I'm so excited about the fact that it's just getting better and better, and more entrepreneurs in the world, more people in the world, aren't saying I want to be an entrepreneur. What they're saying is, I want to change the world I live in, and entrepreneurship is the way to do it, so I'm going to learn the skills of entrepreneurship. That excites me a lot because these people are making the world a better place.
I'm going to put you on the spot here with this particular question, so if it's an industry that you're not super familiar with, just let me know. But have you had a chance to dive into or use any of the e-learning platforms out there like Skillshare or Creative Live or Udemy?
Yeah, I have played with all of them.
So an interesting question that I'd love your insight on. How do you feel about those businesses in that industry and essentially their product, right? The product is information that can solve somebody's problem or empower them in some way, right? And yet information is becoming more and more commoditized. If you go to Skillshare, you can find 50 to 100 lessons on one specific topic from 50 different people. And it's, $15 a month. So how do you feel about that industry and what is happening from an information perspective? I guess is the question.
Just about sort of what part? I just want to make sure I'm clear about using online platforms for education, or?
Well, I guess the question is, if you were in that industry, if you were building one of those platforms, right, would you see opportunity there, or would you be concerned because of the commoditization of information? Or is there a way that you can build out that business to add additional value beyond the information, such as community, brand, maybe tools, something along those lines?
Yeah, so I think it's all upward opportunity. I think you pinpointed it exactly because there is some uncertainty. There's uncertainty. We live in an age of fake news all of a sudden. And while we're not talking about news, people don't know what information to trust and where it's sourced from. And the people that claim themselves experts in a domain or topic, are they in fact experts or just self-declared? So the uncertainty, I think, creates an opportunity because the tools are still powerful and necessary. So I think we have a long way to go, and there's opportunity for people to keep serving that market better and better. Like you said, community is a big piece of it. I can learn from the content, but the powerful learning is when I'm connected to other people that are at the same level as me, and we can all lift each other up and push each other forward. So community was a great example of how you can sort of improve along this spectrum. So I think there's a lot more. There'll be a lot more winners in this space that we haven't even seen yet that'll take it to the next level. And that includes consumer confidence and tool sets.
Very cool. Love it. What has your biggest personal challenge been throughout your career, right? You've clearly mastered the game of business. Have there been areas of your life that you've struggled with?
An excellent question. There's a couple. First of all, the one that everybody always asks me, which I wish I had a better answer, which is balance, right? It's hard. There's nothing worth having ever comes easy. And no success ever came by cruising and coasting. It comes from digging in and doing what you have to do. Now, entrepreneurs claim a badge of honor, like they're proud of the fact, I'm an entrepreneur, I work 8 days a week. That's not a badge of honor. That's a badge of inefficiency. You should be trying to define a life where you don't have to work all the time. But nonetheless, you clearly do work a lot when you're an entrepreneur. And it's hard to create balance. The people that you care about, from friends to family, they just don't get as much of your time because you're so dug in on that. But unfortunately, there's just no big success without big work ethic. I always tell people, if your work ethic isn't as big as your dreams are, you're not going to achieve them anyway. So I think that's one of them, is simply trying to strike balance, that you're living a well-rounded life and being around and taking care of the people you care about in your world. But you're also, when it's go time, you got to go. Entrepreneurs just have to do that. I think that that's a really big piece of it that's always been difficult. And not just for me, it's difficult for everybody to achieve balance in their lives while trying to do this. The other one for me was I'm not a financial guy. I'm an engineer. And so the financial management as a CEO was something I always had to work harder than everybody else, because it does not, in fact, come naturally to me.
Agreed. Same. I can relate to that for sure. We're coming up on the top of the hour here. We've got one last big question for you. I know this is something that I've heard you speak about before, and I think it's important for everyone to hear, which is your take or your approach to building your businesses, let's say, in a linear fashion as opposed to parallel.
Sure. So, I always tell people that you got to win a gold medal at one thing to be successful. That means one thing at a time. Because sometimes people say to me, well, Jeff, you've been involved in a lot of companies, and I always have to point out in a lot of different areas that it's always one thing at a time. And the reason that I use the gold medal analogy is, let's take a girl that wins a gold medal in soccer. She does not, in fact, come home, play some basketball, then kick the soccer ball around for 10 minutes, then swim, then play a little softball, then lay on the couch. She plays soccer 6 hours a day her entire life. Winning a gold medal at anything is hard. And so you're not going to win one at three things at once. So that's why I always tell people, when it's time, when we were launching Priceline, I did nothing but Priceline during those days, nothing else. When I was launching any of my startups, I did that. When we went and launched a music company, I did nothing but music, no internet companies during that time. So I think that when it is an any one venture, when that's the thing in front of you, and sometimes entrepreneurs say, hey, Jeff, I got these 6 great ideas, and I got to tell them, throw out 5 of them. Pick the one you really think you can crush and do nothing but that one until it either fails or it's done. But do nothing until that one reaches a conclusion before you start the next thing. So I think that having a discipline problem, having the discipline to tune everything out except that one thing you need to get done now, is the difference between the successful people and everyone else. The successful people were able to put on those blinders until that project was finished. And so that's been the key. Everything we did that worked when we were doing it, we did nothing but that thing until we were done.
Yeah, great advice. I think that's really important for a lot of people to hear. I know especially folks who are brand new to entrepreneurship have decided, hey, I'm gonna build my own business. I'm gonna fire my boss, and they're all of a sudden deluged with, frankly, an endless supply of opportunity, and they get sucked into 5 different things at once. So I think that's a really important message.
Absolutely, there's targets of opportunity, especially if one of them, money always matters, right? So there's something that that pops up that you could make a little money doing this right now, and startups always need money, so they tend to get deterred. Ooh, I should jump on that. And they keep jumping on targets of opportunity and never getting to the end game.
Absolutely. Well, Jeff, this has been absolutely phenomenal. How can we as an audience support you or serve you in any way?
Well, I love hearing stories of using entrepreneurship to make somebody's life better, whether it's yours or somebody's around you. So I love hearing your stories. I'm easy to find. LinkedIn's probably the best way. That's my most prominent social media tool that I use. I'm on the other sites, but find me on LinkedIn and tell me your story. I'd love to hear what other people are doing and how they're using the privilege and skill set of entrepreneurship to make the world around them better.
Fantastic. And last question, why are you so generous with your time? Right? You have you've made all the money you need to make. You could be doing anything you want. So to spend the time to come on a humble podcast like this to support entrepreneurs is unbelievably generous. But why do you do that?
Well, thank you. But it's really here's a amazing lesson that I'll share. When I was fortunate enough that we sold our company and made the first millions of dollars when I was still in my 20s, and I looked around and I said, "That's it. This is what everybody's sitting in rush hour traffic. Everybody's in the rat race. Everybody's on the plane reading a book on self-improvement. This is it. What everybody's trying to get to." And I remember I was excited when I sold the company. I was excited that we made a bunch of money, but I was also disappointed. And I said, it's just not as fulfilling as I'd hoped. This can't be what everybody's, dreaming about every day. And when I later made a commitment to giving back by donating my time and mentoring entrepreneurs around the world, it turned out that these last few years, so I've been on this sort of world tour of mentoring for almost 5 years now, all right, that I just stopped doing business and running companies to give back. These have been by far the most fulfilling and memorable and just joyous years of my life doing this. So I have found that this, the old adage of giving is better than receiving. It's been so much fun and so many great stories, and I met so many amazing people that I was only committed originally to take a year off to giving back by mentoring and giving my time. This is year 5. That's how much I have enjoyed this period of time, meeting other people, hearing their stories, and trying to help them.
Awesome. Well, I'm for one extremely grateful for your time today and for this opportunity to get to know you and to bring your message, to my audience. And so thank you so much for that. And guys, go connect with Jeff. He's one of the most humble, leaders that I've ever met in my life, and is an absolutely amazing person to learn from. So thank you once again, Jeff. I really do appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much, Mike, for having me, and I look forward to you and I crossing paths again somewhere soon.
Absolutely. I would love that. Thank you so much.
Thanks.